currently, right now, the U.S. has this massive amount of debt. The money printer is still working at this point. It's having diminishing returns. But maybe the real crux or maybe pain point that we have right now with being able to sort of project power globally is not just in the money or the debt that we have, but the ability to even fight a war, to even be able to produce the goods that we need.
Well, I think your British analogy merits closer attention, because you're right. They created the Bank of England for those purposes. It was also the strategic engine in many ways, at least in monetary terms, for the founding and expansion of the British Empire. But having said that, Britain did recognize limits and constraints, and they operated within these limits and constraints. They understood the criticality of gold backing their currency. And so they were able to be part of various alliances and coalitions that defeated various enemies, whether it was Louis XIV or Napoleon Bonaparte. And they were able to do it without enormous loss of life and without fielding enormous forces. The large forces that did most of the fighting were always continental, largely German-speaking and Russian-speaking armies, connected with some others on the periphery, but those were the main ones to defeat these French forces. That changes in 1914, and a very, very bad decision is made, and that decision was to intervene in the First World War, something for which the British were not prepared and could not sustain. And by 1917, it was pretty obvious to anybody looking at the facts on the ground that France and Britain were losing. Mm-hmm. And so the pressure for the bankers was enormous for us to come into the war and ultimately bail out the French and British imperialists. So we ended up doing that. It had terrible consequences for us because we destroyed Europe. And we eliminated the major powers in Central East Europe that held the European civilization together. Mm-hmm. Wherever we have intervened historically, we have distorted the natural dynamic forces in the area, which ultimately determined how people would be governed and how people would live. And that's been disastrous because we are, much like Great Britain, ultimately a maritime and aerospace power. We are not a continental military power anywheres, but in the Western Hemisphere. So like the British, we've never had a requirement for a very large army, and having to field large armies, especially during and after World War II, was an expense for which we weren't prepared. And we had to sustain this all through the Cold War, which was, frankly, not a good thing. I mean, people don't realize how much of our wealth was squandered on containing the Soviet Union. So here we sit at the end of this whole process in 1991. We saw ourselves as having, quote unquote, won the Cold War. In reality, the Soviet structure simply collapsed. Mm-hmm. It didn't make any sense. State socialism was a disaster. There was an opportunity then to do a lot of things that made sense. The first was to get out of NATO, or at least set NATO up to operate without us.
Right.
You know, NATO is kind of like, I'm sure some of you have contracts with ADT. This is a nationwide security service mm-hmm. that comes to your phone and wires your doors, your windows, and then you have an alarm system. Well, NATO has been the ADT analog for Europeans now for, almost 70, 65 years, and they've never had to pay for it.
Yeah.
That's the problem. They say, oh, well, that's not true. We put money here and here. Let me tell you, it's a pittance. I served most of my military career in Europe. I lived over there for 10 years, went to school there, served there twice, 3 times actually, twice in Germany and then once in Belgium. We provided free of charge ADT for the Europeans. And oh, by the way, we've provided ADT free of charge for Japan. Mm-hmm. And to a lesser extent, Korea. The Koreans did join us in Vietnam, tried to reduce the burden on us there, but not Japan. Japan's national strategy has been to extract as much wealth as possible from us and get a defense for it without paying for any of it. And it's worked. So what Donald Trump has been saying and is now saying publicly, this needs to end. And of course, you know, you're dealing with countries, especially in Europe, that have been spoiled rotten like children. And they don't want us to leave. They want us to continue to pay for everything and protect them for nothing. Now, there are a lot of people in Washington that don't like it because in Washington, everything is mortgaged to vanity as well as money. That means everybody likes the fact that we have U.S. forces all over the world. People like to stand up and talk, and even President Trump does this, which is really annoying, frankly. We have the greatest armed forces in the world. Nobody can stand against us. Well, if you're like the British before World War I and you skillfully avoid fighting anybody who can really fight back, you look pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And Britain looked pretty good in 1914 until it faced the Imperial German Army, and the rest is history. Same thing happened again in World War II. So your point is accurate. We're really not organized, trained, equipped, and ready or structured to go after anybody who is a near-peer opponent, if you will, or a peer opponent. And I hope people begin to understand that. And the answer to that is not to pour money into the old structure and the old defense establishment because we need a new one. It's to cut back on spending, defense spending, figure out what it is that we need, and then build that, and then steer a different course in foreign policy. And that course is war avoidance. You mention that in Washington, and people look at you and say, what? Conflict avoidance? Well, why?
Yeah.
Because war will visit us here on the continent. It's not what it was. The world has changed. The technologies we once enjoyed a monopoly over have now proliferated. War is dangerous. The last president who really understood that was Eisenhower. And he understood that World War II was no great march to victory without massive, massive loss of life and, this disruption of our way of life. So, you put together the end of the fiat system, which I think is staring us in the face, or its collapse, together with this giant force that's not really the force we need for the future. It happens to be the force that we've used for the past 50, 60 years to pulverize anybody we didn't like and bully people into submission. How do we rectify this? And that's where you come into a discussion of where do we go from here financially. And
Right.
I don't really feel competent to discuss that in detail, but I think Bitcoin fits into that because the fiat system is not going to survive, not in its current form.
Right. When you talked about the British Army looked strong until they met the German Army, and sort of the U.S. is sort of looked strong. If you look at it, and I think, I've heard many of your interviews talking about this, sort of the U.S. was sort of put on a global stage, well, 2 times maybe. So I've heard of like the generations of warfare, maybe the 3rd generation of warfare was like the industrial armies of like World War I and World War II. 4th generation sort of being maybe starting in Vietnam, more of like a guerrilla type warfare. And so if you look at like from Vietnam forward, I mean, how many of these wars have we been winning from the U.S. side? But then maybe more specifically in the Ukraine conflict, maybe the U.S. was sort of exposed as being a little bit incompetent or behind maybe what the Russian military was?
Oh, I think it has been. It's been very much exposed. Now, how profoundly has that affected our standing in the world? It'll take time to sort that out. The quickest way to demonstrate, the weakness of the United States strategically would be to disable or sink an aircraft carrier. People don't realize the enormous impact of the loss of the Prince of Wales, its giant British battleship that had been sent along with a cruiser by Churchill to Singapore in 1942. And at the time, the admirals told Churchill, don't do this. They're at risk. And he said, what do you mean they're at risk? These are the greatest warships in the world. He said, yeah, but they don't have any air cover. And their air defenses on board the vessels are inadequate. And he said, nonsense. Well, we know what happened. The Japanese found it. They flew out to it and they sank it. That was the beginning of the end of the British Empire. And then subsequently, we have the defeat at Singapore, which pretty much nailed the coffin shut. So those kinds of events matter. We haven't really experienced that yet, but that doesn't mean we could very easily and very suddenly. One example, I think, of course, are the Houthis. Look at the success the Houthis had against the United States Navy in the Red Sea. Well, was that the fault of the sailors on the ships that they weren't able to avoid being struck and they weren't able to damage fatally the Houthis? No, of course not. They're simply in the wrong vessels, doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons with the wrong weapon systems. This is years and years of negligence. It's also years and years of continuing to buy the same things and spending money on the same things that we always have, because that makes people inside the Beltway wealthy. That makes the donors happy. It creates money. It doesn't help us in defense, which is why spending more money for defense is not an answer. It matters how you spend it and on what you spend.
Right.
It also matters the quality of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that you have, the quality of discipline and leadership. So, I think your question is a valid one, and I would say yes, we have been exposed to some extent, and I don't see any evidence that we are seriously examining what has been exposed. I really don't. I don't think the majority of the people I talk to has still all sorts of fantasies about what is really happening on the ground in eastern Ukraine and what isn't. Complete failure to understand what the Russians have really done. And I think it's unfortunate, but there's not much that we can do about it. It's very, very hard to take a power with the kinds of armed forces we have and persuade the people that lead it to pay attention to reality on the ground, especially if that reality is so radically different from what they imagine.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, in life, sometimes you have to take a loss or hit rock bottom before you change direction. And certainly we hope it doesn't come to that point. But kind of talking about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, you said that the conflict is essentially over, but maybe just not officially. Now, there are some terms of a treaty that have been proposed. It looks like that's coming to a head. But you said it is essentially over, just we haven't really, reality hasn't caught up to that.
Well, the opportunity to have influenced this positively in a way that would have led to peace and stability was lost a long time ago, because the people in Washington, London, Paris, Berlin, the globalists that are ruling us, weren't really interested in peace. The problem that President Trump has is, I think he is, but he doesn't control Congress, and Congress has no interest in peace. The Senate and the House are happy if we continue to spend wastefully on what's happening in Ukraine, as are the people in Western Europe. Now, the reason in Europe's a little different. I think the Europeans still delude themselves into believing that they can harm Russia. But the sanctions haven't really had the desired impact. Whatever impact they had was rapidly balanced out by other actions. And we found that most countries in most cases can find a way around sanctions. So that's not really our interest anymore. I think that President Trump really would like to normalize relations with Russia and be on a better footing, sure footing with the Russians than we are. I just don't know that he can make it happen. And if you look at these 28 points, I think somebody pointed out to me recently, well, if you want to read the 28 points that have now been reduced to 19 that are probably going to become 10, you need to go to the men's room in the Kremlin and look at the current version on the wall, because it's meaningless. Russia has won. Russia will determine what Ukraine looks like, what Eastern Europe looks like beyond the Polish border. That's a foregone conclusion. The Russians have no interest in conquering Eastern Europe, never have. They don't even want to move much beyond where they are right now. They want to get on with business as usual. They would like, I think, to have good relations with us for the same reason we would like to have good relations with them. But again, President Trump had the opportunity after he took over to say, look, I didn't start this. I don't like it. I don't see any value in it, and I'm going to end it. And the only way for this to end is if I in Washington pull the plug. I halt the flow of funds and equipment to Ukraine. This will compel the Europeans and the Ukrainians in Kiev to reach some sort of deal. Because as long as we continue to support them, they are simply not incentivized for peace. And they don't care how many millions of people that are killed. 1.8 million Ukrainians is about the latest number I've gotten. 1.8 million Ukrainians in uniform are dead.
Terrible.
And we don't care. We don't care.
Yeah.
I don't see any evidence that anybody on the Hill gives a damn.
Yeah.
In fact, I've begun to think that the average African warlord cares more about the people he leads in Central Africa than most of the senators and congressmen care about us, Americans, let alone the Ukrainians.
Yeah, they're so detached from it. But I think it has seemed like Trump has tried to pull the plug, as you said. But to your point, maybe the neocons and the warmongers in Congress keep pushing forward on that. But
well, we haven't stopped the money.
Right.
We haven't stopped the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance information that is vital and essential to anything that the Ukrainians want to do. Haven't done that. We haven't halted all the equipment, although the equipment that's promised that the Europeans are now being expected to pay for probably won't arrive for 2 or 3 years.
Is some of that maybe just to keep a little bit of pressure on to get Putin to tell us what his terms are going to be to reach that peace agreement?
He's already done that. He's told us his terms for 3+ years.
Okay.
It's not a secret. There's no pressure on Putin anymore.
Yeah.
None. There might have been 2 or 3 years ago, because at that point, the Russian military was much smaller. They hadn't yet geared up. Their manufacturing base was not running at full speed. Right now, Russia is mobilized for war. And if they're pushed by the Europeans stupidly, they'll mobilize for total war. And I'll tell you that Putin is right. A war between our European allies and the Russians would end very quickly. And it wouldn't end well for the Europeans. Again, it takes at least 10 years just to build an army.
Right. Hey, if you like this short conversation I just had, you're going to love the full-length conversation. Don't miss it. You can go ahead and click right over here, and I'll see you over there.